If you dream of coloring like this, but everything you try looks more like this, that's the tutorial trap. You have these amazing markers and colored pencils, tools that professional artists use every day, yet you're not getting professional results with them. Why is that? Today, I'm going to start with this daisy tutorial that I found on the internet, and I'll show you how, as a professional illustrator, I can step up the game a bit. I've got 5, maybe 6 tips that you can totally do in your next coloring project. Let's call this a marker makeover. Let's color this daisy again. But before we get started, can I tell you how extremely awkward it is to sit here in front of a camera and talk to complete strangers about how to color better? You're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. And that's definitely not what I'm doing here today. I am not the marker police. If you color to relax, I am good with that. You keep doing whatever it is that makes you happy. But I think sometimes the happy folks don't quite realize that there are a lot of people who are not happy with the cozy coloring. Maybe you're a secret artist. You didn't go into art and you didn't study art, but you are artistic. But after a while, this blending combo stuff, it just doesn't cut it anymore. If that's you, then you're who I make my videos for, and you're the kind of student that I work with in my artistic coloring classes. I've been teaching markers and colored pencils for over a dozen years now, and I can honestly tell you, there are more frustrated colorists out there than you think. You're not alone. Lots of people sense that something's just, it's kind of missing. You can't really put it into words. You just know you want something a little more. So in today's video, I am not saying this is wrong. I'm just sharing what next level coloring could look like for you. This isn't the only way to color. It's not even the best way to color. It's just how artists used to use markers back before blending was even invented. And this might be the answer that you're looking for. So this is one of my digital stamps from over at markerpencil.com. To color this daisy, I went online and I searched for daisy marker tutorials. I found several, but I'm not here to point fingers at anyone. So I combined the colors from one tutorial with the coloring process from a second, but they're all pretty similar. I followed the instructions very carefully, and this looks a lot like the coloring that I see online and in videos. I am not throwing shade at this. I'm just saying that it's pretty typical for marker blending. But to take this to an artistic level, we got to get rid of the black stamp lines. Because I don't know about you, but the daisies out in my backyard do not have black outlines around them. Since I can't erase the lines, I have reprinted the line art in light gray, and then I had to color it all over again a second time. I used the same markers and all the same techniques. Now, side by side, black line versus gray line in comparison, this reveals the reason why so many people feel like their coloring looks flat. Because it is flat. As soon as the outlines are gone, we can finally see what your coloring is doing and what it's not doing. Now, this was not a rush job. There's 47 petals here, which means I blended 47 times. And honestly, it doesn't look like I did much. When your coloring feels flat and kind of blah, it's almost always because your coloring can't stand on its own. You need the black lines to say this is a daisy. If the black lines are doing all the work, then your coloring, even though you spent a lot of time and care on it, it's just not doing its job. Now that we can see what the color is doing, we can make improvements. fix this? Well, we need something more than just a one-size-fits-all generic petal coloring technique. For my class projects, every single one of them, they all come with at least one photo reference. I am always telling my students, you can't make something look real if you don't know what real looks like. Now, I know we have all seen daisies before. I know if you close your eyes, you can picture one. But the truth is, your memory of a daisy is fuzzy at best. And at worst, we remember things wrong. We need a reference to make decisions. Now, when I drew this daisy, my reference was pink. But we want to color it white today, so I had to go looking for a white daisy photo reference. I wanted a daisy with kind of similar petals, but they don't have to exactly match. I mean, we're never going to find another daisy with exactly 47 petals in these exact positions. We also need to see the entire blossom like straight on, the same way that the line art was drawn. And because my background is also going to be white, I wanted a white daisy that doesn't disappear into the white background behind it. So here's the reference that I found. Now let's talk about what to look for. Okay, so the first thing that I notice when I compare the daisy photo reference with the standard blended daisy, these values are way off. Can you see it? Okay, well, let me help you. If we flip both daisies to black and white, we get rid of all the color distractions. Now all we can see is the value of every color. So look at how far off the yellow blending combination was in the center. We not only needed deeper yellow markers, but we also needed to do more than just like shade around the outside edge of the button. Okay, so let's fix this yellow button. First, I'm going to flip my paper over because I want to see how much more ink I can still add to the center here. I'm using thick Bristol, and I'm not seeing a lot of bleed through here, so I think I can still add a lot more ink. I'm going to add 2 more markers over the original blending combination. So it's going to be B60 and then YR23. Now, this gray-blue marker over the yellow, it makes the muddy shade color that was missing from the original blending combination. And the YR23, well, that looks kind of brown. That's good. I'm using a pointillism technique to mimic the texture of this button. Blending is fun, but blending makes everything look like plastic. It's just too smooth. Texture adds realism. Now, I'm not really changing the yellow color. I mean, I could have just colored over the original marker with a completely different blending combination. Instead, though, I'm working with it. I'm simply adding some mud, and then I also want to give it like a little depressed area in the center there. Oh, and if you're wondering about the colors and the supplies I'm using here today, I've created a list for you. You can download both my original pink recipe and a white daisy recipe for free. Check the description on this video for the resource page. It is full of information about today's daisy project. Okay, so back to our black and white value vision. Now let's look at the values of the daisy petals. Look at the color value that we needed here versus the original blending combination. So the original daisy recipe, it said to put W3 here. And if I digitally sample the color in the photo reference, that is definitely not W3. When your colors are too light when you don't use enough value and when you don't shade things dark enough, you lose depth and you flatten the dimension. But here's where this daisy tutorial really broke with reality. Even if we had been given the correct color values to shade with, these flower petals were always going to look fake and flat. The tutorial told me to shade up here close to the button and then let the petal get lighter and lighter as we move up and outwards towards the point. In fact, the tutorial specifically told me that the last third of every petal should be plain white paper with no marker there. But on a real daisy, the petals usually dip downward again at the point. So see how these petals, they start dark and then they rise up to a light area in the center. And then almost all of them always get darker again on the point where the petal is turning downward. So the tutorial said to shade here, but not here. And the real daisy has shade on both ends. These details matter because this is the kind of stuff that helps a daisy look like a daisy. I think what happens is we say to ourselves, this is a white flower. And since it's white, we go overboard to keep everything as white or at least as light as possible. We worry about shading light things with dark colors. When we do shade, we tend to use less ink than we should. And we avoid shading in as many places as we actually need to. We're protecting that white. It's so much easier to shade a red flower with deep dark colors. Heck, that's actually fun. But we protect white like it's fragile. And 9 out of 10 dentists will tell you, when you protect the color, you do more harm than good. White is just like every other color. It can only look dimensional if you shade it properly. Okay, one more thing before I make over these petals. Everyone knows we always shade white objects with gray markers, right? But which gray? People spend a lot of time debating whether to use warm grays or cool grays. There's like this big debate over which temperature of gray to use for white. But actually, if you look at a photo reference, it's not warm gray or cool gray. It's both. See, if I sample through the first part of every petal, I'm getting a lot of warm grays. That's because the yellow button is kind of bouncing some yellow light onto the nearby petals. It warms the color there. But way out here, we're not getting any warm bounce anymore. We're seeing cooler tones. So be honest. How many of you use both warm and cool grays on white stuff? Nobody talks about that. I'm the weird one. So we've already got the warm grays here on the paper from the original recipe. Now I'm going to steal that B60 marker, the one that I used to shade the yellow, and now I'll use it to deepen some of this warm gray. It's also shifting the color cooler. And because I'm reading the photo reference, I'm going to shade some of those points, and I'll even add a few like really long ridges. I'm moving away from the tutorial instructions towards what I see in the photo reference. And hey, remember when I sampled those whites in the warm zones? Well, I see a lot of warm buttery glow in that shady zone, but I also see it in the area that we just kind of assumed was white. So I'm adding hints of YR quad 0 to the petals. White isn't just white. White is a rainbow, but that rainbow is subtle, so I think most people miss it. By the way, did you notice anything missing in my project today? Well, okay, first, for all of the changes that I'm doing, I didn't use any blending combinations and I didn't even try to blend anything. It's a myth that blending creates depth or dimension. Blending is just another way to apply color. And to be honest, sometimes the blending technique makes realism harder than it ought to be. The other thing is, I will not be using a white gel pen. Welcome to the first Daisy tutorial in the history of the world, which isn't decorated with Morse code dots and dashes. Crazy, eh? Okay, so I'm getting to the point where I want to add some fine details. So I'm shifting to colored pencils. And the first thing I'll do is use a goldenrod pencil to break up the pointillism even more. I want to give the center a fuzzy look. Then I'll adjust the shading deeper with a dark purple pencil. But I have a special assignment for you right now. And this is the kind of thing that will set your coloring apart from everyone else's, even if you're using a tutorial. Every time you color something, go one step above and beyond. What I mean by that is look at a photo reference and find just like one realistic detail that other people might miss. For me, I'm always keeping my eye out for traces of green chlorophyll. If you remember back to grade school, so leaves are green because they're like taking in the light from the sun and they're using it to make food for the plant. Now, stems are also green because they have chlorophyll too. But what people don't think about is that green often comes up out of the stem into the petals. Once you learn to look for it, you're going to see green and greenish hints in some crazy petal places. Look, it was there the whole time. It's there on almost every daisy, and yet very few people bother to paint or color it. That's my above and beyond. Look closer at a real daisy, and you're probably going to spot things that I've missed. The job of an artist is to show people things that they didn't notice before. The last thing I do is adjust my values. Yes, I started with the values and I'm going to end with the values because they're that important. I'm using a gray pencil called Slate Gray, and it's really a little more blue than it is gray. As you add more color to the image, it can totally throw off the shade that you've already applied. The dark purple pencil added a lot of darkness to the button area, and now the gray Copic areas don't look quite as strong as they used to. New color changes how we see the old color. So I'm going petal by petal, and I'm pushing those shady areas just a little bit deeper. I'm also separating petals, which have kind of merged and melted into each other. This sometimes happens as marker ink dries. The edges get softer and a little bit more mellow. You don't usually notice it because your black lines have been hiding this for years. I'm just using a sharp pencil to correct some of those edges and make them nice and crispy. Now, remember marker earlier in this video when I checked the back side of my paper? Here it is again, and this looks like I could have added even more marker. The makeover that I did here today would not have been possible on many brands of paper, including some papers which specifically say marker on the label. High quality paper, it really matters. Watch this video next to learn about my favorite paper for marker art and why you should seriously think about switching.